So
because I've been a little swirly, so
yeah?
I'm sure I'm going to be swirly.
No worries, no worries.
What's that?
This is like Mio Sport. I've been using this a lot, actually. Want to see it?
I want to, yeah.
Basically, an electrolyte with B vitamins in it. The only thing I don't like about it is the artificial flavoring. Yeah, all that fun stuff.
Oh, it's made by the Kraft Heinz Food Company.
It's the best company around, aka Unilever and all those conglomerates. Yes, but it does the trick when I'm running around in the city, because I noticed that, like, I get about 15,000, 16,000 steps
most days.
Yeah, when I'm in the city, so I'm just dying for electrolytes in the city.
I actually wanted to get that many today, but I realized that I was racing around so much that I had no time, so I had to drive down here. So today, I've only gotten 6,000 steps so far. Yeah.
We're going to be teaching a class soon, right?
I'm teaching 2 classes, but they're both very gentle yoga classes.
Okay. Yeah. Are you got your Fitbit on?
What?
You got your Fitbit on?
Yeah.
Fitbit bump.
It keeps me honest.
Yeah.
You look so good. It's really so good.
I haven't seen you in how long now?
Since you left IDB.
Like, oh God, is that like 3 or 4 years now?
It's crazy.
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm still there. But that's a whole nother.
You have a following at IDB.
Yeah, I do.
You know?
Yeah.
Like,
this is also being recorded, right?
Yeah.
Oh God, this has to be.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how many people at IDB actually listen to this.
Yeah, it's funny.
Hopefully all
of them. Yeah, it's funny. That's a really popular class of mine, and I don't quite understand why. The longer that I've been teaching yoga, the more deep I've gone, and so the less interested I am in
like typical group fitness classes.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I've never really seen myself as like a fitness instructor. Right. It's just that yoga has now entered the fitness world, right?
Yeah. How long have you been doing yoga? I want to ask you like background questions.
Yeah, great.
Because like most of the time, whenever I saw you at IDB, it was always like, hey, what you doing today? Oh, that's really cool. Let's share techniques, all that kind of stuff. But I never really got like deep with it. Yeah. So I don't know, like, how long.
And we, it's funny because I don't normally do this, but I did teach handstand the other day. And I was like, so this is how Mike taught me how to do it. Right? And then me and him played around with walking to the wall and away from the wall.
That was kind of like our initial conversations.
It was really fun.
Right?
Yeah.
Just playing around.
Totally.
I don't know how I got away with playing around so much with the bank, honestly. Like
the bank is it's a pretty open place, and I think it's also because it's very culturally Latino.
Right. It's
mean,
much more playful.
It's much more playful, I think, because it's more Latino than sort of dominant culture.
Right. I feel like as much as I played around, I still was pretty on top of things overall when I was there, compared to other HFS, the health fitness specialists that I have seen go through there since then. You have an update on what's going on there, but I don't want to ask you too much.
Oh, you totally can. You totally can.
What's changed since I left?
Well,
anything changed much?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I'm actually like, Bill left. The new guy's good, but I don't think there's anything that's really that
pretty much the same.
It's pretty much the same.
I stay in contact. I still go to the bank like probably once or twice a month because I've got a couple online training clients there.
Great.
I'm doing mostly online training now.
Awesome.
So like the things I really like to do right now are online training and podcasts, basically.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So I like catching up with people and geeking out about like health and fitness, and then doing stuff I like doing stuff online too, because I feel like it's people have such a hard time just getting things going, and I feel like, especially the direction I'm going now, I feel like online makes it easier for a lot of people. It doesn't make it easier for everybody because some people have technical difficulties, for example. Like I'm probably not going to have like geriatric people online that much, although I've been surprised by it. Like I've had a couple of geriatric clients online.
Yeah, because I mean that makes it accessible for
Right.
them, right?
Right.
Even seniors.
Yep.
Yeah. No, it's funny. I haven't done very much online stuff, and people are always telling me I need to.
Mm-hmm.
But I do love the face-to-face.
Right.
And some of what I've been talking about with people is that there's actually like almost like a backlash now against online. So some of the folks I know have been doing like online group coaching, that kind of stuff, like they're starting to do in real life, because I do think that there's something missing, and I think
for sure.
I think it's really helpful when you see people's faces, but so much of how we, for example, heal from trauma is attachment, right? And safety. Well, it's all polyvagal theory, which is
Remember Gabor Mate, by the way?
I love Gabor Mate. I always say that he is my second. Yeah, he's my second favorite.
Like we never talked about.
Yeah, I love his stuff. In fact, I'm taking a short online class that he's offering.
Oh yeah,
right now. Yeah.
Speaking of online, right? Yeah, that's awesome.
You know what? It's.
I didn't know he did that.
Yeah, he actually offered, I think, for the first time, a longer online course, also called Compassionate Inquiry. And
how would you describe him, by the way?
So he's a medical doctor.
Right. He started in traumatic.
Well, he's a Hungarian Jew, and he was born during World War II. Right. And
his family fled.
His family, they were there, and then they left. Right. His father, I think, was in like Russia at the time. I forget his whole biography.
Yeah.
But
it's really interesting.
Because of his experiences, I think he was born in the refugee camps after the war. I mean, I'd have to look.
It was super.
I know for sure he's a Hungarian Jew, and I think he's 70. He's in his 70s now, so it would make sense. But I mean, when he talks about his biography, he often says that he failed, and every failure led him to somewhere else. Like, for example, to work in addiction medicine, to work in trauma, to work with ADHD. So he works from all those places, you know, and because of his interest in, I think, healing the whole person, he's also interested in medicines like psychedelic medicine, and that's made him a little
bit
like,
kind of
popular.
Recently, like he wasn't dabbling in psychedelics until like much later in his career.
That's probably true. And he always says, you know, this is something I do once or twice a year, because people will otherwise think that he's just doing ayahuasca all the time.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry, yoga teacher. I have to take
I'm
off
taking
my shoes.
I was doing this earlier.
Really yeah. And I just want to get
wool socks on too.
I have wool socks on, so I just want to
get.
Now
people definitely can't kick us out because they'll come in here. Like,
So I'll just get really comfortable. I've always been attracted to him because I think the first book that I knew of was called When the Body Says No. And at that point already, I had already been working with the GW Center for Integrative Medicine, I believe, and
I love all of
interested
your,
in
different things you do, by the way.
Yeah, me too, but sometimes I can feel a little dispersed and scattered.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
scattered is a good
but I also love the whole cross-pollinating aspect of it.
Right.
But so his book was really, I'd always heard about the mind-body connection or mind-body spirit. And I was always like, what the fuck does that mean?
Right.
And he was, his book, When the Body Says No, explains the psychoneurobiology of that in a way that me as a lay person could understand that, and sort of make the connection also between stress and resiliency and autoimmune diseases and cancer.
Right. Things we deal with kind of behind the scenes with a lot of our clients.
Yeah, I think it's almost always like there. And I've now put that like front and center.
Yeah.
Totally. So I think
I'm very curious.
I mean, the way that my kind of narrative arc has gone is, I mean, let's
start from
I stopped going to the gym when I discovered yoga. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And at first it was really like,
But you were a gym rat, would you say, before that? Were you going pretty often?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
I've always been, I describe myself as active, but not athletic.
Like what age did you have that big switch over, would you say?
In my 20s.
In your 20s?
In my 20s.
Okay.
I've never done competitive sports. I was always like, they don't do this anymore because of like Title 10, but like I was always the last one or the second to last one chosen for kickball.
Yeah.
I mean, I was never very coordinated. I mean, I have a lot more understanding of why now. And it actually has to do with the fact that
a lot of holdups.
My mom was a Holocaust survivor. She was an Auschwitz survivor. So yesterday was the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. And my father was not a Holocaust survivor per se, but his family came to the States during the Third Reich, but before the final solution. And they both had a lot of psychiatric disorders.
Right.
And went through like electroshock therapy and all this
kind of
stuff. Yeah.
Wow.
In the 1950s, like before there was an understanding of trauma. So it was, before there was post-traumatic stress syndrome, which is now disorder. And so now I also understand all of the physiological and psychological conditions that they had as being related to trauma. And like my mom was on very, very, very strong psychotropic drugs like Therazine and Haldol while I was a fetus, right? Yeah. And so that, for sure, that affected it in fairly minor ways, but significant to me.
Right.
My musculoskeletal development and my nervous system was definitely whacked.
Ability to adapt.
Yeah, I mean, I'm doing pretty good.
I would say you're doing pretty good. But in retrospect, you kind of have a better viewpoint, would you say?
Yeah, and I don't think that people, I mean, because we didn't have an understanding of how trauma even affected sort of the first person, we never would have looked at how it was affecting me. And then I had my own trauma. Then my parents both died when I was very young.
Well, and then there's intergenerational trauma.
Yeah.
Where you don't even notice the coping mechanisms that you kind of inherit.
For sure. I mean, they've done studies where they expose a mouse to like baby mice to like cats.
Right.
And it takes 4 generations of safety for the mice not to have like...
Right, for their offspring not to have the similar traumatic reactions, right? Yeah.
Or overly traumatic, even though they have not been around cats or whatever. I mean, they've done this too with the scent of cherry blossoms, I think, where with rats, they've exposed rats to the scent of cherry blossoms and then given them a small electroshock. And for generations later, just the smell of cherry blossoms would freak the poor little rats out. Even though there was no corresponding.
So glad you give that example. I have such a hard time remembering good examples like that when I talk to people about this. And it's one of the things I try and keep in my head is having like very concrete examples of kind of like, I wouldn't say excuses for people, but just, I don't know, like a safer environment or a safer context for people to understand like why they may be reacting certain ways to things and how to, I guess, I don't know, how do you frame it?
Behaviorally, but also physiologically.
Right.
So you could be more sensitive to pain. And if you're more sensitive to pain, do you know what I mean? So there's, you could just naturally have higher levels of cortisol.
I feel like, this might come off the wrong way, but I feel like generationally speaking, there's a much more higher sensitivity just overall in the population nowadays. Yeah. Like,
well, some of it is just asshole mesh. Like some of it, like is, know, like when microaggressions are astutely followed. I'm like, oh God, no, we have to develop a little bit more
skin.
A little bit more skin, and I would say like give up your right to be offended.
Topic, right?
Yeah. I mean, all of this is right, but I would just say that really what we're trying to do for people. And like what me and you are trying to do for people is to help people feel a little bit stronger and a little bit more confident in who they are and be able to
feel like connected. I want them to feel more connected with their potential.
Exactly.
Like their best potential.
Exactly. I want people to feel good enough and have like a regular practice, whatever that means, like to take care of themselves, so that they can engage in their families, in their communities in meaningful ways, so that the way that our society is currently structured can change.
Right.
I mean, it's like if I can connect the personal to the social, absolutely. I think there's a connection, and I've seen that within
drives me in a lot of ways. That's like a big motivator for me.
So say more.
Yeah.
Say more.
You know how a lot of people go through their workday and I feel like they don't feel connected to a strong purpose or meaning with their workday, except for the fact that they're just trying to pay the bills, they're just trying to get that box checked, and there's nothing wrong with that per se, but in terms of like overall health and you not having to deal with things later when you're not exactly well equipped to do so, I think it's really useful to have a strong purpose or meaning. And I feel like helping at first yourself, and then maybe your family, and then your community, and then the world at large, it kind of goes in that order in a lot of ways. So I feel like I've helped myself enough that I can help others, and then hopefully I can help those others help.
And you got to keep taking care of yourself, so you can. They're on concurrent. They're parallel. They're parallel tracks, is how I see them. And I see that it's, the sort of more social justice critical analysis part of me would say, it's kind of fucked up that it's sort of on me that really it's the fact that we live in a capitalistic structure where our only value is what we're producing day by day or week by week. And it's in this kind of socioeconomic structure that people are forced to, that people are forced to work in things that they don't find meaningful because they're trying to pay bills, because they're trying to keep up with so-and-so. I mean, and meanwhile the Amazon's burning, meanwhile Australia is burning. Meanwhile, we have viruses that are spreading around. Meanwhile, we have the bullying in chief. Meanwhile, we're in call out culture. Meanwhile, we haven't quite. We just haven't found a way of being kind and compassionate with one another, which is.
So how do we do that?
Yeah, I mean, it's
starts with
$1 million question. I think we all have to do it.
Yeah.
And I think
being a good example is really powerful.
It's powerful. Like you've kind of stepped out of, I think that all of us that choose, often it's some sacrifice.
Oh yeah, this room is one of those rooms. This is to remind you to move.
Oh yeah. Often it's some sacrifice. I mean, you're, to live a different kind of way, right? Like you're living in a tiny house. You're not like trying to live in a McMansion in the suburbs, and therefore, having to amass debt in order to make appearances.
Well, the reason I say that too is because, I used to weigh a lot more, right? And losing the weight there was a lot of things that losing the weight kind of changed in me and changed in my perspective with me. And I would say one of the biggest things was the realization that if I have people I care about and I want to help them get healthier, one of the best things I can do is help myself get healthier first. And like you said, it kind of parallels in a lot of ways because one, I don't want to be giving somebody the wrong advice, and put them down a path that's going to make it harder for them overall. And two, there's this, I don't know, even more so with family and friends, people, the more you're connected with people, the more they use their past experience to judge the advice that they get from you, So if you're not a good example, it's going to be even harder for you to help those you love the most. And so
Well, I do think that generally what people need is not our advice per se,
right,
but our presence, our sort of generosity of presence,
right,
our realness, our genuineness, our capacity to accept them completely,
right,
in spite of and maybe because of any perceived flaws. And I think all sorts of transformation can happen. And then they'll figure out what they need to do.
Right.
And we
and
can
everybody
also
has their own
provide
timeline with
everybody
that too.
has their own timeline. I do think, I mean, you said, how do we do that? I think that there is this way in which we do have to take care of the self and take care of healing the things that have been wounded within us and in different ways. And I think Shakespeare was right, to thine own self be true. And Socrates.
But still, it's hard for a lot of people to really like know themselves in a lot of ways. You got to do a lot of digging, right?
And we also have to be willing to accept our shadow sides, and we're not taught to do that. I mean, it's sort of like
that's why I got so interested in addiction, by the way, and where I kind of came with Gabor
Mate,
because I don't even like the term addiction in a lot of ways, because it seems so global, it seems so broad in a lot of ways, and it also seems inaccurate in a lot of ways to me, because I lean more towards like an addiction is just a habit with negative consequences overall. And you don't really see that as the definition a lot of times.
Well, I think people talk about it in those sorts of, I mean, so he has a very, his way of looking at addiction also includes like looking at, what is it within you that you're actually trying to heal?
Right. And
you're trying to do that.
He has like the same exact questioning like every single time.
And he's trying to figure out.
And everybody knows it's coming, and yet still.
It's so surprising, right? Because we're not compassionate with ourselves. So people will judge themselves for, like, say, having a glass of wine at night or smoking a little pot at night, when, like, the real.
What is it healing for you?
It's trying to heal something in our nervous system.
Yeah.
Exactly. And
I always think of that.
And it could be a substance, or it could be a behavior. Like, he talks about his compulsive buying of classical music.
Right.
Johann Hari is another one. Do you know him?
Yes.
Because he's another wonderful.
I haven't looked deep into him.
You should.
I've seen him. I've heard him on a couple of podcasts.
Yeah, he's been on lots of podcasts and interviews, Democracy Now! And he also, his latest book is called Lost Connections, and it's about depression and anxiety, which he sees as the same thing.
Yeah.
And
same root in a lot of ways.
Yeah. You almost never have just depression. I mean, it's not, he's not talking about bipolar, but usually when there's depression, anxiety coexists with it, and vice versa.
Right.
And he builds the case as to why that is in this book.
I heard an interesting reframing of anxiety recently, which is if you can think about it as excitement, that it can help you look at the situation in a different way, because it's excitement about something new that you haven't maybe created a model for interacting with.
Yeah. The yogis say that anxiety is excitement without the breath.
Yeah, without the breath, because you hold your breath so
just shallow. We're holding patterns. Yeah.
Yeah.
But so so this conversation and how we veered into it just proves my point.
Yeah.
It's sort of like the longer I've gotten into the yoga, and this isn't in any way to sort of diss the more physical forms of the practice, because I so appreciate when people are really particular and explorative in the body, because I think the body is also a sacred vessel, and you could just work at the physical body and have all sorts of miraculous transformations happen. But the more I've gotten into it, and the more I've understood like my own legacy and sort of what was driving me, the less I'm interested in the purely physical forms of yoga, and I'm much more interested in almost these conceptual and psycho-spiritual.
Well, the physical does let up a lot when you're able to let go of the psychological things. Like there's many hang-ups. This is so, as someone who's more in the physical field, I constantly feel like I'm trying to help people give themselves permission to relax into movements. Yeah. If that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
You know, versus kind of a self-bludgeoning feeling that they need to do in order to do movements, you know? And I almost feel like the more I have my movement practice, the more I am trying to help transition people. I'll put you on the screen a little bit more.
Just a little bit, yeah.
Like I love talking about habits and behaviors when it comes to movement. And this is just kind of like a selfish wish in a way, but I wish people could just get into just more regular, minimal, self-reflecting movement habits.
Yeah.
You know, that were healing for them.
Yeah.
But that's hard. You know?
Yes, because what we're told is you should be at your desk, you should be productive.
The whole culture of movement is not reinforcing for
and
that.
not being out, or else our movement spaces are in sort of basement spaces like this with fluorescent lighting, which is really, I don't think, very good for you.
I know.
In the way that
these
our
are blue
design.
Because I can't handle too much fluorescence. And yet I'm under fluorescence all the time. So
yeah, my glasses, which I took off, apparently, if they're transition, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
I'm so rarely in these sorts of spaces, but yeah, it's just, you know, it's interesting. So like the 2 classes that I'm going to go teach today are both for, the first one is explicitly for people with cancer, although I can't get rid of them. So they're almost all cancer survivors, no longer in treatment, which is great.
Yeah.
And
that was one of my first jobs out of college, by the way.
It was?
Cancer rehab. Yeah. Oh. Cancer and cardiac rehab.
Awesome.
Which totally like just lit the fire.
Yeah, totally changes things, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not really about like what you look like, but it's like getting people to reconnect to their body even after their body has sort of betrayed them the same way.
A lot of them feel betrayed too. You know, and the realizations that people have in those situations are so starkly like diametrically opposed. You know, I saw some people who were just, they did not want to do anything at all.
You mean physically?
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe it wasn't a good time for them to be doing something physical. Maybe it was a time for them to be maybe addressing the mental side of things more during that time, because who knows what they're thinking about their own mortality and how things are kind of coming up because of.
So you probably don't know that I had cancer a few years ago. Did you know that I had it?
I think I saw something
because it's on social media.
Yeah, I think I saw something.
I mean, I was very, very lucky with my cancer, but it really drove home for me that, I mean, even though I had early stage cancer, the stuff that was coming up in my head, it really occurred to me that,
especially because you are who you are, you know, and then you get cancer.
What do you mean? Like healthy or?
Well, like you're so, I guess, aware, I guess, you know? So I feel like my assumption would be that you would dissect the situation more than the average person would, right? Like, maybe. I feel like it would be more of a mind fuck.
Maybe, yeah. So I thought you meant, because, you know, it's like, the irony is that so many people who are otherwise healthy and this and that get cancer.
Yeah. Well, like that's the same thing when you talk about like a strength coach and strength coach getting injuries. Like, oh, a strength coach got an injury. Oh my God.
That's what happens.
Yeah, shit happens.
Yeah, so for me, I just became aware of, you know, how I was made into a patient and how much trauma also came up. And I think the week that I got diagnosed, another yoga therapist who did not know that I had cancer sent me a study that had just come out of Germany. So this would have been February of 2016, that showed 80% of women in Germany with early stage, so stage 0 and 1 breast cancer, 80% of them a year later had PTSD-like symptoms. And so it occurred to me that there's like, you know, and I started looking into medical trauma, and I started.
Is that because of treatment, you think, or is it just
I
because
didn't
of
get
the
treatment. I just had
gravity of the
surgery.
situation?
I think it's the gravity of the situation. You know, we still think cancer equals death. I think that most doctors are not very trauma informed. So like, for example, like, so I found out that I had breast cancer. It was right before Valentine's Day, and my very good looking husband was with me. The doctor kept referring to him as eye candy and was like, don't let a little breast cancer get in the way of a great Valentine's Day. Have a sexy romantic weekend. And like, I spent the whole weekend in bed crying. Like, it, you know, and her first treatment plan, like the first thing that she offered me was actually a prophylactic bilateral mastectomy. And it was only when she saw the look on my face, because I was thinking, what? On one hand, you're saying it's early stage. On the other hand, you're saying double amputation.
Jesus.
And and then she kind of backed off. But I just think that we're not, and a lot of times, like, your agency is taken away from you in medical settings. So, yeah. So I mean, and a lot of us have also had some medical trauma when we were kids. So I just had a lot of that stuff come up, and so for me, it was really helpful, because then as a yoga teacher, I was thinking, and at the time I was already a yoga therapist, which is an additional minimum 800 hours of training. And so I really started to think about how I wanted to make more of my classes more trauma informed. Maybe they're not perfectly trauma informed. And because I just never know, like, what people have in their background. And that's part of the gig, right? If I teach a yoga class at IDB or, you know, or at Flow Yoga Center, and I have like 25, 35 people in the class, I'm just never gonna get to know everybody. I'm just never gonna get to know everybody's story. When I do get to know their stories, it's fantastic. But I really never know what people are carrying. And often people don't actually know themselves what they're carrying. And so what happens is that there might be some anger, a sense of entitlement, there might be obvious anxiety or depression, but I don't really know what's underneath that. And so I'm just always trying to be thoughtful.
You kind of paint broad strokes then, right? In those situations.
Unless I'm teaching a class where there's some sort of more homogenizing factor, like everyone in here has breast cancer, or everyone in here is going through weight loss or menopause, or, you know, homelessness.
Let's rewind a minute.
Yeah.
So you got into yoga in your 20s.
I got into yoga in my 20s.
The reason I'm rewinding too is because I like getting people's like backgrounds.
Yeah, it's awesome.
And then
and at the time I was also doing kind of organizing work, and mainly with Central Americans, other Latinos, sometimes African Americans, but
I'm gonna wave at this thing now.
Oh yeah.
I see it.
But mainly with immigrants and refugees. And, you know, I connected to that being the daughter of immigrants and refugees, right? And it was funny. I got into yoga, and it probably took me 6 or 7 years before I became a yoga teacher. And I really struggled against it. And I took yoga teacher training and didn't want to do it because I saw myself as a klutz. I didn't see myself as like primarily a body-based learner. I didn't know how I was going to be a helpful teacher to anyone.
Is that related to the fact that you didn't like feel like you did well in sports and everything like that, like you were saying earlier? Yeah. And I often felt very disconnected from my body. I mean, on one hand, I was always having like body-based experiences, but I didn't
there were things about my body that,
right.
I think there was also a lot of shame. I think we have a lot of that. And so sort of, I don't know. I mean, it was just.
But then you got your yoga instructor certification.
Yeah, I had a friend who owned a yoga studio, and she sort of kept pushing, and she sort of made the case that I was a good facilitator. And
you have a great vibe overall.
Oh, thank
I would
you.
say.
And anyway, so I kind of got over that, and almost immediately I was like, you know, the regular sub at Walter Reed, and thrown into teaching yoga classes with men and women who had different limbs amputated. And that was almost like within the first year of my teaching, even before I think I was certified to teach.
Yeah.
But then I kept having all this body stuff too. Like my back would go out, and then I was teaching like this really athletic form of yoga, but like I couldn't practice it without being in pain. And I think yoga has helped me more than it's hurt me, but I think I've also hurt myself many times, including this past weekend, by pushing through. I did swimming, aerial yoga, and like an intense flow yoga, and all of a sudden I was like, oh, I can't turn my head, my rhomboid, you know?
It's like
because how many chaturangas do you need to do in one fucking class? Like, this is, anyway, so, but you know, all of this,
that's part of the human experience, though,
it's part
right?
of the human experience. And I think realizing at some point, like I realized, like maybe 5 years into teaching, that in fact, the way that I was pushing myself all the time in yoga and physically was like almost a form of self-persecution that I had internalized.
Well, that's
a lot of hatred.
Biggest barrier, I would say, with a lot of clientele who want to get into an exercise routine or who want to get trained. Or, I mean, you see it like, what's one of the most popular forms of group fitness is boot camps, right? And that mentality is rampant. Yeah. And that's the most popular form of fitness, pretty much.
I never want to be yelled at.
Right?
No. I mean, it happens to all of us, and I understand it, but I don't think I would pay to be treated like shit. Or although it's also true, Mike, isn't it, that there's been a shift and like, you know, there's a lot more great jobs and positive reinforcement, and I do see
the level of intelligence in the field, I think, has definitely gone up.
Yeah, and there's also an understanding that like everyone has like different bodies and different shapes and different sizes, and you know, you could be overweight and really strong and much healthier than someone who's like thin and looks good, and that, you know, hypermobility is not a great thing, even though you could like kiss your own ass. Yeah, I mean, I think we and that like you don't have to do specific movements that I mean, like primal fitness, right, is an example of this, or Katie Bauman and Jenny Rollins and all these kinds of people. Yeah, I mean, everything. I mean,
Katie Bauman's my spirit animal.
Oh yeah, of course she is. With the like, you know, the dropped over fit of the whales. Like I'll never look at like hunched shoulders.
I know,
the
right?
Same way. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it wasn't that intelligent when I got into it and when I was teaching yoga. I mean, I was really lucky, actually. My back stuff, and then my kind of like overall joint weaknesses and my psychological distress was also all of my woundedness was what kind of kept drawing me into like the right practices.
Right.
And so
but you kept going.
I kept going, and I got really into like yin yoga, which is more about the fascia. And so that, because of that, I learned comparative anatomy, which most yoga teachers don't learn. Again, it's changing, so now I think they do, but 200 hours is not very long in your initial training.
And that's the usual.
And that made me understand like why I couldn't do certain things that other people could do, or how like me trying to make myself look like other people.
But I think that's an important point, because a lot of times, like even with boot camps and those kind of classes, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. in a self-aware, hopefully way. Like you need to know what is the point where I'm not learning anymore, I guess. Where if you're just kind of beating a dead horse, you're beating a dead horse versus am I learning in this experience? Can I take something from this experience?
Or am I having fun? Or is it like, you know, kind of like, I'm not Christian, but when I'm in New York City, I walk into St. Patrick's Cathedral.
Right.
I don't really pray, but I write in my journal when I'm there. Why? Because the vibe of St. Patrick's is reflection and connection.
Right.
So if I'm by myself, I might not exercise in the same way as when I'm around other people. That's fine.
Right.
But ultimately, we have to find ways of teaching people about the peculiarities of their own bodies so that when they go to a group fitness class, they can still, be their own teacher.
Exactly.
And really understand how to modify.
Right. And not just check out.
And not just check out and frankly, a lot of men check out by overdoing.
Right. Men especially. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same thing with psychedelics. I mean, so in the past few years, I've also had some psychedelic experiences.
Yeah.
And what I've been really fascinated by was that, and this is an overgeneralization, but I've been really curious about why men and Americans are so obsessed with heroic doses.
Oh yeah.
And I think it's sort of the same approach to, you know, with everything. It's like more is better.
Term.
I want to blow my mind. And it's like, but that's not necessarily how change happens.
That's the kind of thing where I'm in this conversation. I'm trying, and in a lot of the conversations I have, I'm trying to pull out principles, you know, or kind of like mind maps or things that you can, when you become aware in a situation, you can use this as a compass to kind of help you progress, you know? So I keep coming back to the boot camp, for example, because it's the most extreme example in my mind. But
I've never done a boot camp.
Yeah. But it's not, I can't. I mean, I'm not going down that road, but like, there's going to be something in your movement practice that's not going to be useful for you, and there's going to be something in your movement practice that is going to be useful for you. And if you can work on being aware in that movement practice about what is right for you, you can take pieces of that and slowly build what is like a whole movement practice in a lot of ways.
Right. And I would add to that sort of an understanding that comes more from Ayurveda or Chinese medicine, which is that we are always changing.
Right.
And so even if you look at like the seasons, like what's going on in your relationships, what's going on in your work life, where on earth you're living, because different parts of earth also have different meridians and different vibes, right? Like DC is not like New York is
the
not
air
like
you're breathing
Rome.
in DC versus the air you're breathing out on the farm.
What you're eating, you know, all of these things are also like, you can't have one movement practice.
It needs to adjust. It needs to be fluid.
Yeah, and all the time.
But you'll always have some general.
But you'll have some general ones. And I also now am a much bigger believer. Again, when I first started with yoga, like I used to hear things like, because Ashtanga was really popular at the time. It still is, and there's lots of benefits to the practice. And Ashtanga,
okay,
which is a set sequence, and you know you're supposed to do it 6 days a week, 90 minutes of practice. You know, it's very intense. Rigid. Yeah, and I really don't believe that doing the same movement pattern 6 days a week is beneficial for the general population. I mean, there are maybe bodies that can handle it, and younger bodies.
That's a specific psychographic
but this
demographic.
Is what we were. I mean, this kind of idea had really bled into all of yoga when I was in my 20s. So in the 90s and even in the 2000s.
What's the thing that has the energy behind it, right?
It was this idea that you needed to do your practice daily. Yes. And now I'm like, I go swimming one day, I might do bar the next day. The next day I might do some gentle yoga and take a 5-mile hike. then I might not do anything for a
but
couple
you wouldn't know
days.
any of those things unless you went out and tried those things and experienced many different things and then figured out what's the thing that works for you.
And if I hadn't gotten injured so much, and if I hadn't started to understand, like, oh yeah, I am actually hypermobile here, but like here, my I have a lazy ass. My glutes would not turn on for years, and I had no idea because I was doing squats. But you know, when my back also went out, you know, so it's like you're constantly learning. Or like my whole, because of breast cancer surgery, like even though I had PT and I just had a lympectomy, like I didn't have a mastectomy. But it affected the whole brachial plexus area, and I still have some gripping issues, and which is fine. I can live the rest of my life walking up to strange men on the street and saying, "I just had surgery. Can you open up my bottle?" And they'll all be happy to do it. You know, I make up shit all the time.
Was that a Jewish accent?
Yeah. Everybody, I'll be like, "Please," I'll do it. You know, I mean. But the point is like we also learn so much from injury and illness, and I think we also learn how to have compassion for injuries and illnesses that we'll never know in our own bodies, but we see in our students' bodies.
So devil's advocate, because I can hear people like listening to this, thinking this right now. That's fine for you guys to say. You guys actually have knowledge in the field. You've done all this training and all those hours basically learning this, and it's something you're passionate about. But how does like a normal person figure all this out when life is always changing and I don't understand? Something happens to me and I have no clue how to fix it.
Well, I think that's fair. And for me, I mean, I've never thought of myself as being very good at science or math, and so anatomy never really interested me. And it was just one of those things that took me like it takes me repetitive exposure to learn about it. And for me, because I see the world, you know, from inside this body, it has meant that it's taken me a lot of like illness and injuries and you know, a lot of experiences, and then I finally learned something that might be useful.
I would say, even as somebody who many would consider an expert in the field, you still have a beginner's mindset when it comes to your own kind of health and well-being, right?
I am not an expert. You know what?
I know you would say that. Yeah, so I said other people
well,
would
here's
say
what
that.
Here's what I want to say about expertise.
Yeah.
When I was in my 20s, probably around the time that I was just getting into yoga, I was working with nonprofits, and I was doing what was called capacity building, coaching, leadership development. So sort of, you know, I thought that I was working with individuals and with organizations to help build strong movements.
Right.
And I had one boss who used to like hire me out as an expert in strategic planning, an expert in fundraising, an expert in board development, an expert in, and it really, it eventually, what being an expert did to me was it sort of burnt out my soul. It made me feel like I was supposed to know everything. And I didn't. And I could see the difference between.
Well, who is an expert really? And when it comes to like the human body.
But I think exactly. So when I think nobody is, because everything changes all the time. So, you know, when I think of, I mean, for me, there's no benefit in being an expert. There's benefit in being curious and a learner. And that's in general, and that's about the body. I mean, I had this really cool experience this year where I did a 5-day dissection, cadaver dissection. I should say last year. It was in June of 2019. And it was something I had been thinking about for 10 years, but I sort of needed to grab my ovaries to do it, because it's one thing to be around people who are terminally ill, or to be in a room with someone who's dying, or to have so much death in my own personal life, but to be with my hands inside a dead body.
Oh, you mean you actually got hands-on?
Wow. Yeah, and it was it was an unfixed cadaver, which means no chemicals.
Oh, wow. Holy macaroni.
It's a really cool experience. And in that lab,
do not disturb.
Oh yeah. So in that lab, I felt like I knew nothing compared to everybody in there. You know, I mean, there were all these people who had evolved for many years, and who, there was one guy, he was on his 14th dissection, and I think, you know, the teachers, I mean, I don't even know how many hundreds of dissections Gil Headley has led. So,
what's a broad field in a way that we work in? You know, like we work in, I guess you could say, like preventative health.
It's true. I mean, Mike, yesterday I was talking to another woman who's a yoga teacher, and we were talking about how much we hate the instruction, shoulders over wrists. And I was like, it only works if you have 90-degree flexion. And she was like, oh, you mean extension? And so we had a moment where I was like, flexion. And I realized, oh, right, she, like, I totally, like, that should be a basic movement, and I totally fucked it up. So, yes, with all due respect, I mean, I'm not really an expert in any of this stuff. I mean, what I still, you know, whether I was working with individuals in more leadership settings, or if I'm working with groups in yoga, I think I'm still spiraling around this desire to make that connection between personal practice and social change. And I've gotten more skillful at facilitating that, and there's certain, you know, there's some content that I've learned better.
Well, it's experience. You have to gain experience.
Yeah, but you don't have to be an expert to help someone else.
Yeah, agreed. I don't think you can be an expert in this field.
And the science changes all the time. I mean, doctors would say that all the time, right?
Well, I don't think, I mean, going back to your point about how much things change in seasons and everything else, I mean, 2020 is different than 2010. The health atmosphere overall, it just is. The air quality, the social environment,
people's awareness of food also has changed tremendously.
The culture, you know, our farming practices, all those things, like all those change, and many of them you have no control over whatsoever.
No, most of them you don't. I mean, I just read an article last week that basically said there are these forever chemicals in many, many cities drinking water, and that those things cannot be filtered out. Did you share that on Facebook? I did.
Okay. I saw it on Facebook. I didn't open it because I was like, I know I can't.
I know. I mean, it's you know, and even like a lot of what we think about is like normal, healthy aging. I don't know, like hearing loss, for example. Like, there's nothing normal about that. That's about living in the industrial age. You know, so yeah, I mean, everything, all of our understandings are constantly changing.
Right. So it comes back to like good mindset overall, I would say.
I think that's really helpful.
Yeah.
I do, like, I guard against, I mean, what you're hearing when I guard against any sort of paradigm that puts 100% of responsibility on the individual. So I think mindset is super key.
All right.
But I also think like progressive policies are really clear, are really culture. Key. And like, like, can you, like, if we had the Canadian system of healthcare, or if we had the Swedish system of equitable incomes,
or if our climate was healthier,
would we have as many people killing themselves? Would we have sort of, do you know what I mean?
We have a whole podcast just about like school shootings, for example, and the trauma and why it's upticking and all of that. That would be kind of dark, so I probably won't go.
But it's fine. I can do dark.
Right.
Child of Holocaust survivors. I'm happy to do dark. Yeah.
But I just mean like you're familiar with like a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset.
Totally.
Because mainly for the reason that you know, the Serenity Prayer. So help me to fix the things I'm gonna butcher it. give me a second. God help me to accept the things I cannot change the things I can, and have the wisdom to know the difference. Right. Something of that nature. Right. I'm not even like a very Christian person or anything like that, but I think
that's 12 steps, right?
Right, yeah. But I think that and that with the combination of the growth mindset, can really help people at least find a path, and kind of get in the right direction. And I know it's very hard to kind of get there in a lot of ways, and you may have to do some digging to get there. And you might even, like, people need each other, like you can't do it alone.
Without a doubt. And
we are social
and
creatures.
We go forward and we go back.
Right.
All I'm saying is that, yeah, and I think we have no choice. We have to do those things for ourselves.
Right.
And I think there's also a need to advocate for a different kind of framework. Because this one is really killing us.
Well, it's very unnatural. It's very unnatural.
Yeah. And very cruel.
Well, greedy, you could say, in a lot of ways.
Well, look at what we're doing to our water. And a lot of that has to do with petroleum.
I tell you, I used to canvass for Clean Water Action when I lived in Colorado.
That makes my heart love you even more.
Yeah. I was like, I don't like canvassing just overall as a thing, but I was like, if I'm going to canvass, that'll probably be one of the big things to canvass about, because if you don't have clean water, what do you have, right?
And clean air.
Yeah. I know. We're close to time. I have so many more things I want to talk to you about. We'll have to do this again at some point.
I would love to.
Yeah. I gotta get the clients. It's 3:01. Yael's gotta go teach some people the good stuff.
I do.
But I want to say thank you, everybody, for listening.
Thank you.
And we'll probably have a part 2 at some point once we figure out our craziness with our schedules and everything.
It would be my pleasure.
You want to leave anybody a message or anything?
No.
Before? No?
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Peace out, everybody.